Started with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to study together, Lord, and to learn, and give me the words to speak, Lord, that they will hear the message that you have for them. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so with this, it's going to be broken up in a couple parts. This part alone will be 3 parts. So the first, we're going to be looking at the sons of Noah. The last time we talked about the state of the world before the flood came. Now we're kind of fast forwarding to look at after that, how did sin enter back into the world, right? And we're going to be taking a peek into the sons of Noah. So the first one we're going to be looking at is Ham, right? And so in Patriarchs and Prophets, the Tower of Babel, chapter 10, it says, "Yet in the 3 sons of Noah was speedily developed the same great distinction seen in the world before the flood. In Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Japheth, who were to be the founders of the human race, was foreshadowed the character of posterity." It says, for a time, the descendants of Noah continued to dwell among the mountains where the ark had rested. As their numbers increased, apostasy soon led to division. Those who desired to forget the Creator and to cast off the restraints of his law felt a constant annoyance from the teaching and the example of God-fearing associates, and after a time, they decided to separate for worship. So now what we're going to be focusing on is unpacking the civilizations that came out of that. And I think it's very important as we move forward in our study of the Bible to kind of get an understanding of who these different nations are, right? Because when we mention them, we have no clue who they are or where they come from or what their origin or what their belief system is. We just know that the Moabites didn't like the Israelites and it caused a problem for them. So by going through each one of these sons, just like how it was supposed to be for Adam and Eve to populate the world, they had children, and their children all looked different because we have different people, right? We have Asian people, we have Hispanic people, we have black people, we have European-looking people. Everybody looks different. And so from these 3 brothers, you get all those different avenues of people, right? So we're going to be looking at the nations that came out of this lineage and what they brought to the table, right? So the first one is going to be Ham. Now, we just read that they were constantly annoyed. So it's like after a while, you grow up in the same household, you keep hearing the same message, and then you decide, as soon as I'm big enough, I'm leaving this church. I just don't want this lifestyle anymore. So the Bible, Amos 3 verse 3 says, "Can 2 walk together unless they agree?" Right? And Romans 8:7-8 says, "Because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, nor indeed can be. So then those who are of the flesh cannot please God." So we just read that they had got to the point to where it was time to part ways, right? So each one of these brothers take off and go in a different direction. The first brother we're going to look at is going to be Ham, and he has 4 children. And his children make up a certain region of the New World, right? And they're still there today. Let me make sure that I am tracking myself. I'm supposed to be on slide 7. So the first one we're going to be looking at is Canaan. Now, tracing the descendants of Ham through the son rather than the father, he declared, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants, shall he be unto his brethren." The unnatural crime of Ham declared that the infernal reverence had long before been cast from his soul, and it revealed the impugning and vileness of his character. This evil characteristics was perpetuated in Canaan and his posterity, whose continued guilt called upon them of judgment. So let's back up one little tiny second. Who was Ham? Do we know who Ham was? or what he did. We know he was one of Noah's sons, but he had a specific role to receive this curse. So anybody want to give a shot at what it was? Yes, his father, afterwards, Noah, he became a gardener. He built a vineyard. The grapes got just right, and we know what happens when grapes get just right. And he drank them. He got drunk, and he passed out in his tent, and he was indecent. And Ham said, "Come look at your daddy. He done passed out, he's naked, and he's drunk." And he called his brothers, and they showed reverence to their dad. They backed in backwards. They had something over their shoulders to cover him, and they laid it over. And the next day, Noah found out what it was, and this is where it is. The curse, he put a curse on Ham, but it fell on his descendants, right? That they would be the servants of the others. So that's where we are as far as this is concerned. Would you mind reading? Let's turn to Genesis chapter 12, and we're going to read 5 through 7. And if you don't mind reading that for me, that'll be, you can't see. Well, never mind. Want me to make it bigger? Okay, that's okay. So in Genesis chapter 12, 5 through 7, it says, "Then Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran. And they departed to go to the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan." And why are we reading this? This is how the Israelites acquired Canaan. Canaan became their promised land. This was the land that was promised to them, and this is where it was given to them. This is how they got that. Abram passed through the land to place of Shechem, as far as I can't read that, terebinth tree of Moran, and the Canaanites were there in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." And there he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared. So the Canaanites' land was promised to Abraham, right? So as we get ready to go further into this story, we need to know the origin of who the Canaanites were. They were a descendant of Ham, which was Noah's son, right? And we're going to go into a little bit of what their belief system was and why they ended up losing their land to the Israelites. So God already knew down the line what was about to happen, and he promised that land to to Abraham. So what were the Canaanite religious beliefs? They worshiped Baal, Azra, and Moloch. They practiced child sacrifice and temple prostitution. They practiced occult practices like divination and sorcery. And the Canaanites carried forward the anti-God tradition. So they were going to be punished because this particular line of descendants went full-fledged into idolatry, right? So these are the cousins, the distant cousins of the Israelites, because each one of the sons had lineage, and one of them is where the lineage of Abraham came from, right? So with the curse that he got, he was going to lose his land, he was going to be a servant, and he gave it to the Israelites, which were God's people. This is what they were known for, and this is what the behavior that they carried on as their nation progressed, okay? So this is who the Canaanites are. They are one of Ham's children. In Leviticus 20, verse 2 through 3, that's why I can't see it. I don't have my glasses on. "Again, thou shalt say to the children of Israel, whosoever," this is God giving them a stern, stern warning. "Whosoever he be of the children of Israel, or the strangers that sojourn in Israel, that giveth any of his seed to Moloch," that means start to worship the god of the Canaanites, "he shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones, and I will set my face against that man and will cut him off from among his people, because he hath given of seed unto Moloch and defiled the sanctuary and to profane my holy name. So why do you think God was so harsh? Because it sounds like very harsh, a harsh punishment. Why do you think that is so? When they say giving of his seed, his children, any of your children as a child sacrifice to Moloch, okay? So you would consider your seed something from you. Let's think about it. I underline of the strangers that sojourned in Israel. What is that passage referring to? Any takers? It was the Egyptians that left Egypt with the Israelites when they left, right? And why was the punishment so harsh? It was intended to break the cycle of idol worship. Now, we know that the Egyptians worshiped many gods, right? They had lots of gods. They had gods for everything. Gods for fertility, gods for the water. And we're going to learn why that is so and how that still happens today. I was so excited about that. It was intended to break the cycle of idol worship brought from Egypt, because some of the Israelites, while they were in Egypt, were dabbing into that as well, right? Prevent the spread of the Canaanite religious influence, right? If you let it start seedling in and people start doing stuff, it's going to take over. And to protect the holiness of God's people and his sanctuary. It wasn't a punishment of him being cruel. It was a measure of protection to keep the people from turning astray back to idolatry and to keep their eyes on Christ. Worshipping Moloch was not just a personal sin, it defiled the entire camp, polluting the air and dishonoring God's presence among them. So he had to be very, very stern about this particular situation. Now, who are the Canaanites today? Because we want to know, did they fade out? Where do they live? They are what we would consider the Lebanese. Now, due through centuries of war and captivity, they've kind of blended into these different nations. Because before they were the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Gervasites. Go to Deuteronomy 21, and it lists off all of the tribes that were associated with Canaan, right? And after centuries of war, captivity, assimilation, this is what we come up with. They become the people of Lebanese. They're some of the people of Palestine, some of Syria, and possibly of Jordan, which was the Israel Arab population. Okay? So when we start looking in these parts of the world, those are the people that used to be the Canaanites. That would have been their descendants. Okay, so the next son we're going to be looking at of Ham's is Cush. Now, Cush is really well known, and you want to know why? Why? Take a guess. Why would Cush be well known? It's not so much of Cush, because Cush is Ham's son. It's Cush's son that we know very well. It's Nimrod. That's Nimrod's father, right? Nimrod. It says in Genesis chapter 10, verse 8, Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth, right? And the mighty one is not looked at in a good light. They're not saying he was a good person, right? He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, which many scholars interpret as he was a physical hunter as well as a hunter of man and conqueror, and he was a tyrant. So he was a person that would hunt people down and kill them for dominance, and he murdered his way to kingship, right? And then he helped institute in the belief system of deities. He's the first empire that was built after the flood. The founder of Babel, which led to Babylon, which is a symbol of rebellions against God throughout the whole scriptures. Okay? So that is who Cush's son is. Now, we just read that when the curse was pronounced, it was pronounced on the descendants of Ham. And this is where we're seeing that take place. We're going to get to that. That's going to be next.
Kevin
right?
needs a
So
microphone.
Babylon became the Assyrians. They assimilated with the Assyrians, right? So it says in the beginning of the king of Baal, Baal, and then they had some other kingdoms that they started. I'm so sorry, y'all. I just cannot pronounce those names. On the land of Shar, and from that land he went to Assyria and he built Nineveh. And we know that Nineveh was also a murderous nation, right? The Babylonian religious system is Baal. It's the birthplace of where that came from, the rebellion against God. He started astrology, sun worship, and idolatry. All that came out of Marduk, right? And remember, we studied that those gods are just rebranded for different societies. Now, these societies are related. They're all family. And when the confusion of the language, and then they went and they started to multiply, that deity just became a different name and served the same purpose in a different place. They founded a Babylon religion, which included Marduk. Now, as time went on, the Babylonians, they assimilated, became the Assyrians, so they conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. In 722 BC, the Assyrians conquered that kingdom of the Israel's 10 tribes. They destroyed Samaria, the capital, and departed thousands of Israelites. This event is known as the Assyrian captivity, right? The Bible sees this as God's judgment on Israel's idolatry and disobedience. So the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them from his presence. Only the tribe of Judah was left. And we can read that in 2 Kings. So they had a long history of war, right? Who else came from them? Sennacherib was in the line of Cush, okay? He was a part of that army that came into Hezekiah and was threatening to take him over. And King Sennacherib of Assyria attacked Judah and besieged Jerusalem under King Hezekiah. According to 2 Kings 18 through 19 and Isaiah 36 through 37, God miraculously delivered Jerusalem after Hezekiah prayed and the prophet Isaiah prophesied God's intervention. And what happened? How did God intervene? One night, one angel came and killed like 100,000 of them, right? He avenged them. That's the next one. It says that the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. So when we're reading Assyrians, the Nineveh, all those kingdoms, Sennacherib, this is all from the line of Cush and Nimrod. These are all those people. Are you tracking me so far? Anybody have any questions? We sure? Okay. Now, who are these? This is in the book of Nineveh. I was looking at my next paper. Nineveh and the book of Jonah. We know that Jonah didn't want to go because they were enemies of the Israelites. So they had a long-standing history of being the thorn in the side of the Israelites, right? And coming up against them in war. And when we read in the book of Jonah, God sent the prophet Jonah to preach to Nineveh. Those are descendants of Nimrod. Jonah resisted because he hated the Assyrians, but eventually obeyed. Shockingly, the Ninevites repented and God spared the city and showed them mercy. But we know after a while they went back to what they were doing. And then Jonah chapter 3:10 says, when God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them destruction and a threat. So we're looking at the history going down, and the nations associated with these brothers, right? So far, we looked at the Canaanites who had the Baal and Moloch, and how they had their own form of idolatry and worship, and how they lost their land and how they assimilated, right, into these other places. Now we're looking at Cush descendants, Nimrod, and how they were just, if he started out as a mighty hunter for men, right, and he is causing all of this friction and causing all of these wars as we're going through the time, he was a thorn in the side of God's people as well. So who are these people today? I'm going backwards. Who are these people today? That's the question we want to ask. The Babylonian Empire, which he had founded, grew under him. Nebuchadnezzar, and later fell under the Medo-Persians. So all the way down to Nebuchadnezzar, this takes place because he was a part of that Babylonian Empire. The Assyrian Empire, which included Nineveh, became powerful in the 8th century, but it fell to the Babylonians and the Medes. So that was the end of his reign. Are you guys following me? I know it's a lot going down the row, so I'm open to take questions. Anybody have any questions? Belteshazzar. All right. So here it is, the Babylonian Empire, which was founded, was taken over, right? And Nebuchadnezzar did that. So who are those people physically today? The people of Nimrod's region, the Babylonian Assyrians, correspond with modern Iraq and parts of Syria and Turkey. The ancient Cushnites settled in Sudan, Egypt, and Arabia. So when you're looking at those parts of the world and when you see all that art, that fighting that's still happening, it came from their great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, who was kicking up dust way back when and murdered his way to the top. And these people are still doing fighting like that today. So my goodness, history does kind of repeat itself. Even in the Bible, that Babylon is still mentioned, right? It's the mystery Babylon. It's a spiritual connection to Nimrod's rebellion. It's a symbol of false religion and global deception and a persecution of God's people. And they have hold to that name all the way through, right? And then to the end, that nation will still be that beacon of showing rebellion to God. Y'all are quiet tonight. Kevin, you like you got a question. Okay. So here's the next two sons, Mizrah and Put, right? And it's so interesting about these two. It doesn't mention them a whole lot in the Bible, but their descendants of where they came from, the nation and the region they came from, is mentioned quite a bit. Now, before we talk about the Canaanites, that is the name of those people. They're mentioned quite a bit, right? And we talk about the Babylonians and the Assyrians, they're mentioned quite a bit. But these two, their area of which they live is talked about quite a bit, which puts us in the reference of these two brothers, okay? So Put is such an interesting character. Your Put would be your blacks, right? That's where the dark-skinned people come from. I believe that the Native Americans probably came out of that as well. The islanders, all of your fair-skinned brown people came out of that. Put is often associated with the regions of North Africa, like Liberia and parts of the Western Sahara. In Ezekiel 30, verse 5, and Jeremiah 46, verse 9, Put is mentioned as a military ally of Egypt, which supports the idea they were located nearby North Africa. The descendants of Put were known for their warrior and archery. Nahum chapter 3, verse 9 says, as they are placed among the African military for the Ethiopians in Egypt, they were considered helpers, ally, and opposing Israel. So these are another nation that went up against Israel, and all of these nations worked and fight together, and they all kind of look the same, right? So these would be the people that came from Ham, would be your dark-skinned people of that region. And I thought that was very, very interesting, for the simple fact is, when we keep going, they had a very specific belief system that is very evident, that has carried down throughout cultures today. Put's religious belief system, they believed in tribal gods, right? So a lot of Native American and people who grew up in villages and stuff like that, they believe they have a tribal leader. They believe that the ancestors still speak to them. They have tribal gods that they worship. They have wars of deity, right? That if you do something wrong, this god of war will come and get you. And animism. Animism. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, because that is riddled all through Disney movies, right? The attribute of the soul of plants, the eminent objects, and nature phenomena are all alive. They worship Mother Earth. The belief in a supernatural power that organizes and emanates the material world. The concept has survived in many societies, particularly among the tribes of the sub-Saharan Africa, the Australian Aborigines people, some islanders of the South Pacific, and Native Americans. They all believe in that. And that is a belief system that came from Put, right? And so when you look at African nations, they have African tribe leaders. They believe in having tribal gods, war deities. They believe that the earth and things are alive, and we're going to see that. The example of that is Pocahontas. It was made in 1995, and this is the Native American culture. She is sitting here talking to Grandmother Willow, and she is talking to the tree who gives her spiritual guidance. This film promotes a view that nature is alive, it's wise, and should be communed with. This is the animistic elements of spirit wind, singing rivers, talking trees, and ancestral spirits. All of that is a stem from Put and the religion that they started way back then. We see it still happening today. This is Moana. She is from the South Pacific. This is a Polynesian culture. The ocean is personified and acts as with intent, essentially a living deity. And then here it is, she's talking to the island goddess that represents Mother Earth, and she's getting what is the word I'm looking for? She's getting wisdom from the ancestors that appears to her as spirit guides. This is, again, worship that was instituted with the people of Put. And these would be the people that lived in tribes that never left, out in the bush. Never left. They were warriors, and they fought, and they were allies together. And we talked about how these would be part of the African nation, African people, the black people, the Egyptians, the different people. And they all had similar cultures, but some of them were more primitive than others, right? So we know that Native Americans buy into that, the Polynesians buy into that, as well as the African culture. They believe in spirit inhabiting plants and animals and ancestors, and we're seeing that being played out in Wakanda. He's talking to the animals in the tree, and those are supposed to be a representation of the tribal leaders or the panthers before him. They come back to give him wisdom. They believe in ceremonial rituals, and they link warriors and kings to spiritual realms. And nature, like herbs and elements, are also seen as divine sources of power. And that is also a part of the religion that was instituted back in Put. We're seeing it on the big screen today. So who are these people today? They are the Libya, North Africa. They are different people in the North African region. that still exist today, and this is who they are. And that's where they live. And their belief system still ripples into our time today. Right? Are you guys with me? Now he has one more son, Mizra. Mizra is the Hebrew name for Egypt. So now the Egyptians, which is another set of brown people, right? The Egyptians were descendants of Mizra, are the Mizra people, and they are the descendants of Ham. Most scholars of the Bible translate and agree that Mizra equals Egypt. And in the Bible, Egypt is sometimes referred to directly as Mizra, especially in the older translations. And these are their descendants. Naphtali, their names kind of have that ancient Egyptian ring to it, right? When you read some names, it sounds like it comes from an Iraqi name, right? But then you read these and they have that Egyptian type ring to it. So I'm not going to butcher it trying to name them all. But one name stands out in there. And which one is that? It's the Philistines. It's the Philistines. From whom came the Philistines? So the Philistines are a part of the Egyptian nation. So they were all dark-skinned people. So when we're reading these stories and we're talking about these different areas, we are talking about these specific people who have their origin back to Ham, Noah's son. All right? Mizra, which is Egypt, their religious belief system was the ancient Egyptian religion and culture that came from the descendants of Mizra and Put. They both kind of had a similar thought process of deities. That's why a lot of times when you see Put and it refers to the North African people, they're always fighting alongside of the Egyptians, right? Or the Ethiopians, because they all have a similar belief system, right? Therefore, Ra and the broader system of the Egyptian idolatry can be traced back to Ham's lineage. Now, that is why in the beginning, when we read that God told them that anybody found among you that is worshiping Moloch and child sacrifice and those Egyptians, it was because of this right here. He knew that they had deities that they worshiped. They worshiped the sun, they worshiped the Nile, they worshiped the fertility gods, and that came through that lineage in those particular people. Also experienced the plagues with Moses, which was shot down with their God. Well, it was probably a showdown. That's what I was meant to put. Which was a showdown with their gods and the one true God, right? So with the Egyptians, the gods they served, when we go through the plagues were all attacking things that they worshiped, deities that would control the things that God was eating up, whether it was the locusts, whether it was the frogs, whether it was the Nile when he turned it to blood, whether it was the firstborn, because they worshiped that in a certain way, right? The firstborn was supposed to be a god. So there it was a showdown between the false gods and the one true God. And that all came out of the Egyptian religion, right? So the worship of the sun god Ra historically is linked to the descendants of Ham, specifically through this particular bloodline. And Ra was an ancient Egyptian god that believed to travel across the sky by day and in the sunboat through the underworld by night. He was the one of the chief deities in the Egyptian Athena and was often combined with other gods like Amra, right? So if you watch any of the historical channel and they start talking about the mummies they find and they call them Amron or some name with R-A in it, they were associating themselves as gods because that was the god Ra, right? So the Egyptians believed that the pharaohs were the sons of Ra, giving them divine authority. So that's why they would have those particular names. Any questions thus far? Any questions? Ed, you got anything? All right, we'll keep moving.
No, good shape.
All right, so we're pretty much to the end here. Who are they today? They are the modern Egyptians. They are possibly some of the group of Sudan and other parts of North Africa, possibly the Philistine ancestors, and Cashalum and Capernaum. I'm sorry, I just didn't major in Bible names. But they are still over there today. They're still the Egyptians. You're still finding pyramids. You're still finding that culture taking place today. And all of these Ham's children all had run-ins with God's people on a negative light. They were forever running up against them, right? Even Jesus was in Egypt for a little while, right? And we know that Abraham went through Egypt and they took his wife. So they were not above confiscating things as we see here. But we know that some of them did buy into the one true God because they left with the Israelites, right? And if they hadn't left and they had no belief system in God or saw that that was the one true God, then there would have been no need for him to give such a stern warning to those that are traveling with you. You see something you need me to answer? Yeah. Okay. That's okay. That's okay. Next time I'll make it bigger font. Deuteronomy 18:10 says, "Let no one be found among you who sacrifice their son or daughter in the fire, who practice divination, sorcery, interprets omens, and engage in witchcraft, or cast spells, or who is a medium or a spiritualist, or who consults the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. Because of these same detestable practices, the Lord your God will drive out these nations before you." And he did that over and over again. We know that with the Canaanites, right? What happened with the Canaanites? God promised way back when to Abraham that their land would be for his descendants, right? So we know that God is not playing when he says that. In Isaiah 8, verse 19, it says, "And when they say to you, seek those who are mediums and wizards who whisper and mutter, should not a people seek their God? Should they seek the dead on behalf of the living? To the law and to the testimony. If they do not speak according to this word, it is because there is no light in them." And each one of those cultures, each one of those different lineage, they all have a core belief, and that's deities and worship of false gods and spiritualism. Revelations 22, verse 14 and 15, it says, "Blessed are those who do the commandments, that they may have the right to the tree of life and may enter through the gates into the city. But outside are dogs and sorcerers and sexual immoral and murderers and idolaters and whoever loves and practices a lie." One of the things that really stood out to me was the mere fact that they created these deities from their own imagination, right? And we know that in the Bible, in Genesis, before the flood, the Lord says that their thoughts were only evil continuously, right? So it was the imagination of their minds to dream up these deities. And I'm sure they had some help from the demonic forces. And they built them with their own hands. And they used God's resources to do it. And they made gods of things that they knew would be an abomination to the one true God, right? And time again, like we read from the beginning, the reason why they all split after the flood was not just because of the confusion of the language, but it was because they had got to a point where they were just sick of hearing about this, the one and only God, right? They decided, I'm over this religion stuff, and they went off to create their own religion, right? And so this is just one brother. This is just the start of certain nations from this one brother. There's two more brothers, and one does the Asian culture, it does the European culture, and it comes from that. And then you have the other one that spawns the Israelites and all those that live in that region as well. So when we go through them, when we start getting into the meat and potatoes now of societies being formed, we can trace them back to their original origin after the flood and know where they came from, what their belief systems are, and why they are so opposed to God's people. Because they begin to intermarry and morph, and it starts getting lost in the weeds. But if you can get the name, you can get the origin and say, I know whose children they are. I know what they believe in, and this makes sense. And I can see why God will warn against mingling with them because they meant them no good, right? All they meant was their destruction. Is there anybody have any questions? That was the last slide. So we're pretty much just going through the brothers. And so if we can get a handle or an understanding on who they are, what they stand for, when we read the Bible, it starts to put a whole picture together when we start talking about the Egyptians and when Abraham sojourned through there. Or when we start talking about David and he was with the Philistines for a little bit, even though they were his enemies. We know what lineage that comes from, right? And we know that all of us are brothers and sisters, right? We're all related some kind of way. And just because we look different don't mean we are different. We're just very distant cousins that have been intermarried and mingled and so on and so forth, but we all come from one of those three, right? And they were repopulation. Everybody says, oh, we come from Adam and Eve. Yeah, because Noah was there, but with the repopulation, it came from those three, right? And so if we can get a handle on who they were, what they stood for, when we start reading the Bible, we have a reference point to refer back to, and it kind of puts the pieces of the puzzle together to give us a fuller understanding. So the next time I'm here, we'll go over another brother, because they all have children, and usually it's traced through the sons, and it makes up the whole puzzle of the people from different regions and different nations. So when we read about at the Tower of Babel, when the language was confused, and everybody who spoke the same language went this way, and they took Marduk, and then they renamed him for their culture something else, and then passed it out through time, through their culture. And then you took Ra, and the Egyptians, they spoke the same language, went over this way, and they took Ra with them, which was a reincarnation of Marduk, and then they passed it down through history. We understand the origin of it all. So I hope that helped a lot. I know sometimes I should bring my glasses because it really trips me up when I read, so I appreciate your patience. All right, you guys, let's close with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, the Bible is a book that we'll always keep learning from. It is something that we'll always get something new from it, and it'll always open our eyes to something else new. And so, Lord, I pray that we did not get lost in the weeds, that when the time comes, you will bring back to memory the things we have learned here today to give us a clearer picture of what it is that you want to communicate to us. We thank you so much for your love and your kindness and your patience for us, Lord. And as we depart from this place, we do not depart from you. We ask you that you will go and be with each and every last one of us till we meet together again on Sabbath. In Jesus' name, amen.